One decision. That's all it took. On the deadliest night of the year, retired firefighter Jack Carter heard a sound at his door, a sound that would change his life forever. What he found wasn't just a stray dog. It was a mother fighting for her life, two puppies frozen to her side, and a secret someone would kill to keep hidden. This is the story of Grace. But this isn't just a rescue. It's a betrayal, a battle, and a bond that would defy all odds. The wind screamed through the mountain pass like a banshee's wail, tearing at the cabin's weathered pine walls with frozen fingers. Inside, retired firefighter Jack Carter sat hunched in his leather armchair, the whiskey in his glass catching amber highlights from the dying fire. At 58, his body told the story of his career, the burn scar across his left knuckles from the Harrison Street fire, the knee that throbbed when storms rolled in like this one. 3 days the blizzard had raged now, transforming his remote mountain home into a snowbound island. The silence so complete he could hear the grandfather clock's pendulum slicing through time in the hallway. Then, a sound that didn't belong. Not the groan of timber nor the rattle of windows, but something alive, a scratching, faint but persistent, coming from the front door. Jack's calloused fingers tightened around his glass, the ice cubes clinking like wind chimes. 20 years of firefighting had taught him some doors were better left unopened. The scratching came again, now accompanied by a whimper so fragile it cut through the storm's roar like a knife through gauze. Setting down his drink, Jack moved toward the sound, his boots thudding against the wide plank hardwood. Through the frosted glass, shapes moved, not the swaying pines beyond, but something smaller, more desperate. He wiped condensation from the window with his sleeve, and his breath caught in his throat. A German shepherd, her black and tan coat crusted with ice like some frozen sentinel, stood rigid against the storm's fury. Pressed between her legs were two tiny bundles of fur, their bodies nearly buried in the accumulating snowdrifts. The mother dog turned her head slowly and locked eyes with Jack, and in that moment he saw something that chilled him deeper than any blizzard. Not just fear, but recognition. This wasn't simply an animal seeking shelter. This was a soul staring down death itself. The wind howled through the eaves as Jack's hand hovered over the brass doorknob. Last winter, he'd found a frozen coyote pup on his porch, its tiny body curled as if sleeping. The memory of its stiff limbs still haunted his dreams. His gaze flicked to the whiskey bottle on the side table, his constant companion since the divorce papers came through. Another whimper cut through his thoughts, this time from the smaller pup whose white-socked paw twitched feebly against the storm's cruelty. With a creak that seemed to echo through time itself, Jack turned the knob. The cabin's warmth rushed out to meet the trio in a visible cloud of condensation. The mother dog, Grace as he would later name her, stood trembling in the entryway, her paws leaving melting puddles on the hardwood, like tiny portals between worlds. She didn't shake off the snow, her entire body taut as a bowstring as she assessed the room with military precision. The smaller pup, a female with one white sock marking her front paw, let out a weak squeak that barely carried over the fire's crackle. Grace immediately bent down, gently grasping the pup by the scruff to lift her away from Jack's approaching hands, with the precision of a surgical nurse. "Easy, girl," Jack murmured, crouching to make himself smaller in the doorway. He'd seen this before. Mothers in crisis during his firefighting days, that primal instinct to protect overriding all else. Moving with the deliberate slowness of a bomb technician, he grabbed an old horse blanket from the hall closet and tossed it near the dogs, then retreated to the kitchen with his hands visible. From the cupboard, he pulled a chipped mixing bowl his ex-wife had always hated, filling it with lukewarm water from the tap. When he returned, Grace hadn't moved, but her nostrils flared at the scent, her pink tongue darting out to lick cracked lips. Jack set the bowl down carefully, pushing it forward with his foot before backing away to lean against the fireplace. "It's okay," he whispered, the words hanging in the air between them like smoke. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here." As Grace finally lowered her head to drink with trembling jaws, Jack got his first good look at her injuries in the firelight. The rope burns around her neck were the obvious wounds, the skin there raw and hairless in patches. But there were others. A jagged scar along her rib cage that spoke of untreated trauma. Patches where fur refused to grow back properly. A slight hitch in her breathing that suggested old damage to her diaphragm. The pups, now burrowing into the blanket with tiny whimpering sounds, appeared unharmed but dangerously thin, their ribs visible beneath patchy fur. Jack's hands clenched into fists without his permission, the old burn scar across his knuckles stretching tight. He'd responded to enough animal cruelty calls during his time with the department to recognize the signs. This wasn't simple neglect. This was systematic, purposeful, the kind of calculated brutality that left marks deeper than flesh. The wind rattled the window panes again, but now Jack heard something else beneath nature's fury. The crunch of tires on packed snow, the distinctive whine of a truck's engine struggling against the elements. Through the kitchen window's frost-rimed glass, headlights cut through the storm's veil before disappearing down the mountain road, like a ghost retreating to its grave. Grace's head snapped up, water dripping from her muzzle onto the hardwood. A low growl built in her chest, so deep Jack felt it in his bones rather than heard it. The vibration traveling up through the floorboards to resonate in his molars. Outside, the snow continued its relentless fall, already erasing any evidence of the vehicle's passing. But the message was clear as the ice forming on the windows. Someone had been watching, waiting, and they knew exactly where to look. The storm broke at dawn on the third day, leaving behind a world transformed. Jack stood at the kitchen window watching sunlight glitter across the snowfield like a million scattered diamonds, steam rising from his coffee mug to fog the glass. Behind him, the steady rhythm of Grace's breathing shifted as she rose from her makeshift bed by the fireplace, her claws clicking against hardwood as she stretched. 1 week had passed since their strange arrival, and the cabin had undergone a subtle metamorphosis. Chew toys littered the corners like brightly colored mushrooms after rain. A second dog bed, purchased during a frantic trip to town, now occupied the space beside Jack's armchair. The whiskey bottle, gathering dust on the shelf, had been replaced by cans of premium puppy formula from the local vet. Grace moved with quiet precision to check on her charges. Snow, the female with the distinctive white sock marking, and Ash, her smoky-coated brother, who were tumbling in their playpen near the hearth. Jack watched as the shepherd dog nosed each pup in turn, her inspection so thorough it could only be maternal. Only when satisfied did she approach Jack, her amber eyes reflecting the morning light like polished tiger's eye. "Morning, girl," Jack murmured, crouching to scratch behind her ears. The scars there were less angry now, the fur beginning to grow back in patches. Grace leaned into his touch, her tail giving a single wag before she moved to the door, looking back at him with clear expectation. Jack chuckled, grabbing his coat from the hook. All right, walk time." The cold hit them like a physical wall as they stepped onto the porch, Grace immediately sinking to her belly in the snow with a surprised grunt. Jack laughed outright at the sight of the proud working dog suddenly swimming through powder that came up to her chest. "Not so tough now, are you?" he teased, wading ahead to tamp down a path with his boots. Their morning routine had become sacred in its simplicity, a slow circuit around the property perimeter, Grace sniffing at rabbit tracks while Jack checked for storm damage. Today, though, the shepherd dog paused frequently, her ears swiveling like radar dishes as she scanned the tree line. when a branch cracked under the weight of snow in the distance. She tensed, the fur along her spine rising in a ridge Jack could see even through her thick winter coat. "You hear something, girl?" Jack asked, his own senses sharpening. The forest had that peculiar stillness that follows heavy snowfall, every sound carrying farther than it should. Grace didn't growl, but the way her nostrils flared told Jack everything he needed to know. Someone or something was out there. They returned to the cabin at a quicker pace, Grace herding Jack along like he was a stray sheep. Inside, the pups greeted them with excited yips, Snow immediately pouncing on Grace's tail, while Ash tried to climb Jack's bootlaces. The normalcy of the scene settled Jack's nerves somewhat, but Grace remained tense, stationed at the window with her ears pricked forward. It wasn't until that afternoon, when sunlight had warmed the cabin enough to melt the last frost from the windows, that Jack noticed the footprints. Not around the house as he'd expected, but leading from the tree line directly to his tool shed and back again. Adult male by the size, wearing work boots with a distinctive tread pattern. The tracks were at least a day old, softened by melting but unmistakable in their purposefulness. Jack's blood ran cold. He'd been up there just yesterday morning to fetch the snow shovel. Had someone been watching him, waiting for him to leave Grace and the pups unattended? The vet's words from their visit 3 days prior echoed in his mind as he bolted the door. "This isn't just any German shepherd, Jack. She's a West German working line, bred for police and military work. Dogs like this don't just turn up as strays. Someone invested serious money in her training." Grace whined softly, pressing her muzzle against Jack's thigh. He stroked her head absently, his mind racing. The rope burns, the scars, the way she positioned herself between the pups in any sudden movement. This wasn't a dog who'd gotten lost. This was a dog who'd escaped. That evening, Jack found himself cleaning his grandfather's old Winchester rifle, the scent of gun oil mixing with the beef stew simmering on the stove. Grace lay at his feet, her chin resting on his boot as if anchoring him to the spot. The pups slept in a tangled heap nearby, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect synchrony. The knock, when it came, seemed to shake the very walls of the cabin. Grace was on her feet in an instant, herding the pups toward the bedroom with quick nudges of her nose before returning to stand at Jack's side, her body vibrating with tension. Jack approached the door slowly, the rifle left leaning against the wall but within easy reach. Through the peephole, a man in his late 30s smiled, all white teeth and expensive sunglasses, despite the fading light. "Mr. Carter," the voice was smooth as aged whiskey. "Name's Vance Collier. Heard you might have something of mine." Jack opened the door just enough to block the view inside, his body filling the gap like a living barricade. Up close, Vance's smile didn't reach his eyes, which were the pale, lifeless blue of glacier ice. The German Shepherd breeder patch on his waxed canvas jacket looked freshly stitched, the gold thread catching the fading light. "Don't know what you mean," Jack said, his voice carefully neutral despite the adrenaline singing in his veins. Behind him, Grace had gone preternaturally still, the only movement the slow rise and fall of her shoulders as she breathed. Vance chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across concrete, and pulled out his phone with a gloved hand. The screen showed a photo of Grace, though Jack barely recognized her, standing alert in a stainless steel kennel, her coat glossy under fluorescent lights. "See? My breeding bitch, Duchess, got loose during the storm with 2 of her pups. Tracking chip led me right to your door." He tapped the screen to show another image, paperwork with an official-looking seal. Behind Jack, Grace let out a sound he'd never heard before, something between a whine and a snarl that raised the hair on his arms. Vance's smile faltered for just a second, his left eye twitching almost imperceptibly. "Now I'm happy to compensate you for your trouble," Vance continued, reaching into his back pocket. Grace exploded into barking so violent it shook the pictures on the walls, her body slamming against the door hard enough to rattle the frame in its hinges. Vance stumbled back a step, his sunglasses falling to reveal eyes that were suddenly wide and startled. And something else. Something dark and calculating that made Jack's firefighter instincts scream danger. "That bitch always was trouble," Vance spat, the veneer of civility cracking like thin ice. "But she's my registered property, and I always get what's mine." Jack felt Grace press against his leg, her entire body vibrating with tension, the heat of her radiating through his jeans. He didn't reach for the rifle, didn't have to. The years of facing down burning buildings and collapsing structures had taught him that sometimes stillness was more terrifying than any show of force. "You take one more step onto my land," Jack said quietly, the words dropping into the cold air like stones into a still pond, "and we'll see what the coroner calls your remains." The silence stretched between them, broken only by Grace's low, continuous growl and the distant call of a raven from the forest. Vance's face underwent a subtle transformation, the pleasant mask dissolving to reveal something far more primal beneath. For a heartbeat, Jack saw the truth of the man, the cruelty in the set of his jaw, the deadness behind those Arctic eyes. Then, as suddenly as it had vanished, the smile returned. Vance bent slowly to retrieve his sunglasses, never breaking eye contact. "This isn't over, old man," he said, his voice almost cheerful. He turned and walked back to his idling truck with exaggerated calm, but the threat hung in the air between them like gun smoke. Jack closed the door with deliberate slowness, engaging both the deadbolt and the chain before turning to Grace. Her entire body was still tense, her gaze fixed on the door, as if she could see Vance through the solid wood. The pups, sensing the tension, had retreated to their bed, watching the adults with wide, uncertain eyes. Crossing to the kitchen, Jack pulled his cell phone from his charger and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Sheriff Dawson answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly with age and authority. "Jack? That you?" "Got a situation up here, Tom," Jack said, watching Grace pace the length of the living room like a sentry on duty. "Man named Vance Collier just threatened to take Grace and the pups. Claims they're his property." The line went quiet for a long moment. When Dawson spoke again, his tone had changed. "Vance Collier? You're sure that's the name?" "Positive. Why? You know him?" Another pause. "Not personally, but we've had reports. Animal Control's been trying to build a case against his operation for years. Never could get enough evidence to stick." Dawson sighed, the sound crackling through the phone. "Jack, that man's kennel turns out champion German shepherds, but the rumors about how he trains them, let's just say I wouldn't let him near any dog I cared about." Jack's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that keep decent folks up at night," Dawson said grimly. "Electroshock collars, isolation chambers. There was even talk of..." He trailed off. "Look, point is, if that's his dog, she didn't just wander off. She escaped." Grace had stopped pacing now, her intense gaze fixed on Jack as if she understood every word. The scars along her ribs seemed to burn brighter in the fading light, each one a testament to horrors Jack could only imagine. "I'll file a report," Dawson continued, "but without proof he's trespassing or making direct threats, there's not much I can do. You might want to consider..." "I'm not giving them up," Jack interrupted, his voice harder than he intended. Grace's ears pricked forward at his tone. Dawson sighed again. "Didn't figure you would. Just be careful, Jack. Collier's got friends in high places, and from what I hear, he doesn't like to lose." As Jack hung up, the first flakes of a new snowstorm began drifting past the windows. Grace finally settled at his feet, her chin resting on his boot once more. But her ears remained alert, swiveling at every creak of the old cabin. Outside, the light faded from the sky, painting the snow in shades of blue and violet. Somewhere out there, Vance Collier was waiting, planning, and Jack knew with cold certainty that this was only the beginning. Spring came late to the mountains that year, arriving not with a fanfare of blossoms, but with a slow, stubborn thaw that revealed the earth inch by frozen inch. Jack stood on his porch one crisp April morning, steam curling from his coffee mug as he surveyed the transformation the months had wrought. The snow had retreated to stubborn patches in the deepest shadows, revealing a fenced yard he'd built with his own hands. Sturdy cedar posts sunk deep into the thawing ground, connected by wire mesh strong enough to stop a charging bull. Grace lay sprawled in a pool of sunlight near the base of an old pine, her coat now glossy and full, the scars along her ribs barely visible beneath the dense fur. Her amber eyes tracked the antics of snow and ash as they tumbled through the new grass, their puppy clumsiness giving way to the elegant movements of young dogs. Snow, her white sock now complemented by three others as her adult coat came in, pounced on a twig with all the ferocity of a wolf taking down prey. Ash, his smoky fur darkening to the rich sable of his mother's lineage, circled the kill with exaggerated caution before darting in to steal the prize. Inside, the cabin bore the marks of their shared life, chew toys in every corner, a collection of leashes hanging by the door, the whiskey bottle on the shelf now holding a bouquet of wildflowers Jack couldn't name, but Grace had sniffed with approval. On the fridge, held by a magnet from the local vet's office, was a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Local breeder sentenced in landmark animal cruelty case." The raid on Vance Collier's property had made national headlines. 43 dogs seized from conditions the ASPCA investigator called among the worst I've seen in 20 years. Shock collars, malnutrition, evidence of fighting rings. The photos had turned Jack's stomach. Kennels crusted with filth, dogs with haunted eyes, surgical scars from repeated breedings. Grace's photo had appeared in the follow-up story about rescued animals finding homes, those she'd hidden under the bed for hours after the flashbulbs went off. A warm weight pressed against Jack's leg. Grace had left her sunny spot to lean against him, her tail giving a single contented wag as she watched her offspring play. Jack scratched behind her ears, his fingers finding the small notch missing from one. A mark the vet said likely came from a poorly removed tracking chip. "You did good, girl," Jack murmured. Grace huffed in response, her breath warm against his jeans before she trotted down the steps to break up a too-rough tussle between the pups. The phone rang inside, the caller ID showing Sheriff Dawson's number. Jack answered with a smile. "Morning, Tom. Don't tell me you're calling about more paperwork." Dawson's chuckle came through the line. "Nope, just wanted you to hear it from me first. Collier's appeal got denied. He's looking at 5 to 7, and that's before the federal charges kick in." A pause. "How's our girl doing?" Jack watched through the window as Grace demonstrated proper stick-chewing technique to her enthralled audience. "Like she was born here." "Good, that's real good." Dawson cleared his throat. "Listen, Jack, the shelter's got another one from Collier's place, male about 2 years old. They're having trouble placing him. Thought maybe—" Jack didn't need to think. "Bring him by tomorrow." Hanging up, he stepped outside just as Snow discovered the wonders of digging, sending a spray of dirt across Ash's face. The younger dog sneezed dramatically before launching himself at his sister in retaliation. Grace watched from a few feet away, her posture relaxed but eyes ever vigilant, ready to intervene if play crossed into something more serious. Jack knelt in the grass, the earth cool and damp beneath his knees. Grace immediately came to him, pressing her muzzle against his chest in that way she had when sensing his mood. The pups abandoned their game to join the huddle, Snow licking at Jack's fingers, while Ash tried to climb into his lap despite having long outgrown it. The morning sun caught the silver in Jack's beard, the scars on Grace's muzzle, the way Ash's fur shimmered like polished gunmetal when he moved just right. Not perfect, not untouched by darkness, but together, whole in a way Jack hadn't realized was possible until that first stormy night when a scratched door changed everything. Grace leaned harder against him, her tail sweeping the grass in slow arcs as she watched a butterfly dance across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its heart out, the notes rising and falling on the warm spring breeze. Jack closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of pine and earth and dog, and thought to himself, "This is enough, more than enough. This is everything." Grace's journey from a frozen doorstep to this sun-dappled yard proves that even the deepest wounds can heal with time and love. But right now, thousands of dogs just like her are still waiting in shelters, their own stories hanging in the balance. Will you be someone's Jack? Share this story to spread the message. Every animal deserves a chance to rewrite their ending, because sometimes the life you save ends up saving you right back.